Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Eric the Old Jarhead here. Today, I want to talk about something that I've seen on social media a lot. Honestly, folks, I think this is important. I think this is something that I can really maybe help some folks out with. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to delve into the basics of off-grid power or, well, solar power. And I think this is important because you are probably already thinking, hey, I know what it takes, right? I just need one of these, a solar panel. I'm going to rush out and buy a solar panel. And I'm going to tell you no. So the biggest challenge, I think, with people that are new to quote-unquote solar power is to get rid of the idea of solar for a minute. Just set it aside. Just forget solar for a minute. And if you've watched any of my videos, you may have heard this already, but let's start with something else that I like to call battery power. So for the very first item, folks, battery power. That's what you're going to run. You're going to run battery power. And I know it sounds crazy. It sounds counterintuitive. It just doesn't sound right. I mean, let's face it, right? You're trying to build a solar power system. But folks, let's be honest. Does the sun shine 24 hours a day, 365 days a year? Well, the answer to that is simple, and you and I both know it, which is no, no, and no, it doesn't. So then, what might work for 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, other than batteries? For the first basic component of any off-grid power system or solar power system is batteries. And those batteries can be like these two, but in a previous video, I actually talked about how that's only if you could provide heat to them. And yes, a lot of people commented in that video that, well, you know, today you got batteries with heaters in them and you can put heat plates underneath them or heat blankets or whatever, and you can put them in insulated boxes and all kinds of great stuff. And if you only just build enough solar power to keep them charged up and keeping themselves warm, it would be great. Well, folks, that's silly. Yes, that works. And if you've got plenty of money to spend on all kinds of extras, well, then great. But you could also just heat the space up traditionally too. So regardless of whether you could build a heated battery box or put it in a heated cabin or carry it back and forth, LiFePO4 batteries need to be in a heated environment regardless of how you get there. Lead acid batteries don't. And yes, in that previous video, and I'll drop a link down below, there were some comments about AGMs and Surette rolls and, you know, all the great expensive options that are out there. But let's be honest, folks, I'm sorry, nobody has yet to prove to me that any of those far more expensive alternatives are really better than good old golf cart batteries. Because golf cart batteries, you can get them to last just as long for a third of the price. Or at least as long for less than what it would cost you to buy the other ones. That is your first component for your off-grid solar power system. Now, batteries. Okay, we got batteries. All right, there are other people that talk about batteries. They rip them apart. They delve into building their own, all kinds of that stuff. I'm not going to do that, folks. I'm a guy that's actually living with his solar power and has for 14 years. So I'm not one that's going to cut this battery box open and find out if there's anything good or bad or indifferent in there. But that's component number one. Well, component number two probably makes sense, but you might not have thought about it. Battery charger. You're thinking, but wait, I'm using solar power. Well, maybe. What are you going to do when the sun don't shine? So you need a battery charger in order to charge the batteries up when there ain't no sun. And the beauty of that is you don't need solar panels to run your off-grid cabin if you got a battery charger that can run off a generator. And I'm not going to include a generator in this solar power off-grid power system, but it probably should. It should be something that you do have, okay? So you got batteries, battery chargers. What's next? You're going to say solar panels? No. No. Inverters. Because most of your solar power systems, your off-grid power systems, aren't so that you could run a 12-volt car stereo and a 12-volt fan and 12-volt lights and a 12-volt fridge and whatever. Generally, that's not what people are doing. When they think, I'm going to build an off-grid power system or I'm going to build a solar power system, they want to run the 120-volt appliances that are in their homes. So in order to run your blender, your coffee maker, your skill saw, whatever, off of that battery, you need one of these guys. And they come in all shapes and sizes. And in my last video, I actually talked about some of these. This one's a little 200 watt modified sine wave. This is 2500 watt modified sine wave. And right now what I'm running is a SunGold Power 4000 watt pure sine wave inverter with a 50 amp charger, here's the key, out at my cabin. How does it charge? It's not going to charge unless it has a power source coming into it, and that's where those generators that I said I wasn't really going to mention, but I mean, you got to at least acknowledge that you either need a generator or you need something to provide 120 volt power to that charger in order to charge up your batteries, whether they're 12, 24, or 48 volts. And speaking of voltages, let's talk about that for a little minute. Yes, this is a 12 volt battery, but if I took these two batteries and put them in series, which would be negative to positive and positive to negative, then they would be 24 volts. And if I had 4 of these guys and I ran them all in series, they would be 48 volts. And there are good reasons to do that. One of them is that you need smaller conductors, smaller wires, which, hold on a second. I wasn't going to include this in the basic components of a solar power system, but guess what, folks? If you don't have these wires, yes, conductors, then you're not going to be able to run, right? You need these to go to the inverter or wherever. So I'm not really including them, but I do want you to note, these are 4 gauge, typically used on car batteries, right? A lot of off-grid guys will use these for off-grid power systems, and you'll even notice that I have one that's got red tape and one that has blue. The blue is a heat shrink, but the red tape is because I had a bunch of these and I was using them to strap 6 volt golf cart batteries together, and those work fine. But why am I talking about those and 48 volts? Well, a 48 volt battery bank is going to have less amps in order to produce the same amount of power than a 12 volt battery bank will. In fact, quite a bit smaller. So you can get away with smaller conductors, which means less copper, which means less money to run to your inverter, right? So you want to go from the battery to the inverter, and typically that's done with 2-aught or even 4-aught cables. Big, huge copper flexible cables, which means you want these things close together, of course, right? But if you're running 48 volts instead of 12, cable can be a lot smaller, much easier to run, less expensive, okay? So we got batteries, we got an inverter so we can use that battery power. We've got chargers so that we could charge it up, and I mentioned earlier I use an inverter charger, so some companies, probably most, will sell you a combined inverter and charger. Now, solar panels, right? We're getting there eventually. We had batteries, we had inverters, we had chargers, we even had cables, and yes, indeed, you're going to need some solar panels. Now, are you going to need one of these? Well, probably not. But let me ask you this. How does the solar panel get to the battery? This is how. It's called a charge controller. And you do need a charge controller. The charge controller is going to take the voltage that is generated from sunlight that's hitting that solar panel, and it's going to convert that power that's coming in, which, you know, a panel like this one's 20 volts and 5 amps. Well, if I'm trying to charge up a 12 volt battery, then I need to put out, if it's a LiFePO4 battery, I need to put out about 14.4 to 14.6 volts. So I've got to convert from 20 volts and 5 amps to 14.4 volts, and then my amps are going to go up a little bit to get the same amount of power. So we're going to need to take that 20 volts through the charge controller. This one happens to be a PWM charge controller. It's just one that I've got laying around that I decided to put up on the wall for you. And then run that 20 volts to 14.4, which would actually be 7 amps instead of 5, to charge this battery up. That's what those are for. So and you just heard me say that's a 20 volt solar panel. Well, how do I use a 20 volt solar panel with a 12 volt battery? Well, that's how. If you want to think about it, folks, there's a term that we use called nominal voltage. It's just like if you run a sawmill like I do, you have nominal dimension. So the nominal dimension of a 2x4 is 2 inches by 4 inches. But if you go to the store and you measure it, that ain't what you're going to get. You're going to get 1.5 inches by 3.5. So the nominal voltage of this battery is 12 volts. But if I put a multimeter on it, I'm going to get 13.6 because it's resting. And it needs to charge at 14.4. So we need to take that voltage that's coming in from the solar panels, which is going to be something higher, and convert it to what we need here, And because it's called a 12-volt system, doesn't mean my solar panels need to be 12 volts. I can have 150-volt solar panels, as long as my charge controller can take that 150 volts and however many amps it is and convert it to the right amount of voltage in amps that I need to charge my batteries. Now, by the way, one of the issues with a PWM controller like this one is it basically isn't going to use any power over about 18 volts on a 12-volt system. So you don't really want to send 60 or 70 volts to this to charge up a 12-volt system. In that case, whatever your solar panels are that are 12-volt solar panels, which are going to be more like 18 volts, if you're going to have several of them to put together an array, a bunch of solar panels to make more power, you're going to want those in parallel so that you keep that voltage down around 18 point whatever it is. Now, that means you're going to be putting an awful lot of amperage across the conductors and into this guy here. So for example, out at the cabin, I've got three 205 watt 12-volt solar panels. Those solar panels are 18 and change in voltage, 18 something, and 11.27 amps. So if I run them in parallel, they're going to maintain that 18.5 volts or whatever it is, but those amps are going to add up, and so you're going to have 33 point almost 9 amps. You don't really want to run 33 amps over a 10 gauge cable on a 50-foot run. Probably need to run some 8 gauge cable. So that matters, and then you're going to be hitting this guy with 33 amps. Almost 34. Can it take it? Well, this is a 40 amp, so it can take it. But you always want to make sure that the voltage and amperage rating of your controller is higher by probably close to 25% than what you're sending it. So if you're sending 100 volts to your charge controller, it should be rated at like 125, something like that. It's a simple rule of thumb that you can use to make sure that you never blow your charge controller, which you don't really want to do because they can be expensive. And nobody's going to warranty a 100-volt charge controller if you send 200 volts at it. Like guys like to do, I'm going to over panel. Yeah, I wouldn't. Yes, there's only certain times of day and year that you're going to get maximum power out of your solar panels. But to me, over paneling is just creating a problem to solve a problem. Fix the problem. Get a better charge controller or set up a second array. That would be better in my opinion. So what do we got here? We got batteries, chargers, inverters, and of course cables, and we talk generators, solar panels, and charge controllers. There's just one more item on that list. Let me get that out. All right, here it is. Now, this happens to be a double pole breaker, not necessarily exactly what you need. But folks, you do need breakers. And the way your breakers should be set up is you should have, and since we started with the battery, let's start there. Your battery should go to a main disconnect. I use a 250 amp main disconnect. That main disconnect will then feed your inverter so that you could shut the inverter off from the batteries, right? In that same main disconnect, you should have, typically you'll have a breaker for your charge controllers. And I say controllers because you can have more than one. I have two. You should also have a breaker set up for your solar arrays. Your solar panels sit out there on the rack or up on the roof, and they have all their cables that either run together or run to a combiner box, but eventually they should all go to that breaker. And there you can shut the power from those panels off before it ever even gets into your location. From there, it then goes to the combiner box, where in a lot of cases, people will put a second breaker in. I don't actually think that second breaker is necessary. I think one breaker is fine. Some people will put that breaker, if you're only running a set of series and you just have a positive and negative wire coming from your array and you're not running multiple arrays, you don't need a combiner box, you could run that straight to a breaker in the main disconnect so that you can turn those solar panels off before they ever get to the batteries. You have a battery breaker, you've got a breaker for your charge controllers, and that's basically it. Now, within that combiner box, there are some more advanced components. That's not what this video is about. I'm just trying to go over the basic components of a solar power system. So batteries, chargers, inverters, charge controllers, solar panels, throw a generator and cables and breakers and that kind of stuff in, and you've got a system. Now, first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit more about solar panels here and nominal voltages, so don't go away. But if you got any questions, be sure to drop them down below and ask me. Folks, I answer everything, every single comment that I get, I read, and I try to answer every single comment that I get, always. And you know, it's not trouble. So it's not any trouble. So do me a favor, put a comment down below. I guarantee you I'm going to answer it, unless there are a million comments, and I'm still going to try to answer it. It just might take me a little longer. All right, I want to talk nominal voltages and solar panels, because this is the other misconception that I hear. There's a couple things about solar panels, and there's a main misconception. The main misconception is, I've got 12-volt batteries, so I need 12-volt solar panels. And I mentioned this earlier. No, you don't. Forget that. Just wipe that out. Take it out of your brain. Throw that away, because it's not relevant. Solar panels may be called 12 or 24 or 48 volts, but that was more in the past, frankly. Because today, you can buy some pretty powerful solar panels. And how do you use that, right? What if you got a solar panel that's got 100 volts? It's, 1,000-watt panel or something like that. And they're making this kind of stuff every day. It's growing all the time. So if you could buy a 100-volt panel, then how would you use that on a 12-volt battery? Well, that's the point. So people always forget the charge controller. So I put a poll out recently and I asked, what is most forgotten in off-grid power, solar power systems? And there were two that really got a lot of answers. One of them was breakers and disconnects and that kind of stuff. And the other was charge controllers. Well, the funny thing is I was looking for charge controllers. Most people put breakers down. And I think they have a good argument there. I think that's reasonable. But honestly, I've seen tons and tons of people post on social media, I've got these solar panels, which batteries should I look at? And I'm thinking, okay, which charge controller do you have? Well, what? You gotta have a charge controller. There's no running your solar panel to your batteries and calling it good. It's not how it works, okay? So back to solar panels now. I don't want to beat a dead horse. But solar panels, they are designed to get to a certain voltage, amperage, and wattage, which watts is simply a function of multiplying amps times volts. And every year, they're trying to pack more into a smaller package. So first thing I would ask somebody comes to me and says, I'm going to buy a 100-watt solar panel. I'm going to say, why on earth would you do that? I didn't even buy 100-watt solar panels 14 years ago when I built the system at the cabin. Why the heck would you do that? And I see people, I got 27 100-watt solar panels. Why? Don't. Sell them to somebody else. Look, folks, unless somebody can put in the comments below a good reason to buy 100-watt solar panels, I would tell you flat out, don't bother. What a waste of time and space. Because one of the components of solar power system, frankly, that I didn't mention is real estate. How much room do you have to put solar panels up? A 100-watt solar panel, folks, this is a 100-watt solar panel. And you know what? A 305-watt solar panel is not much bigger than that. So why put 3 of those up when I could just put one that's not much bigger than that one up? If I want 1,000 watts, why would I put 10 100-watt solar panels up when I could put 2 500-watt solar panels up? So, first and foremost, if you're going to build a solar power system or off-grid power system, stop looking at solar panels. Just stop. Put the pen down, close the browser page, shut the magazine, and stop looking at solar panels. Because what you should be looking at is a battery. That's the heart of the system. And how do you know how big of a battery to have? I will put a video together to show you how to figure out how much battery power you need, because I do see all the time. And actually, I'm going to be honest with you, it kind of drives me a little crazy when I see, I've got 27 solar panels, how much battery do I need to run my house? Folks, if you don't know the size of your battery yet, don't buy solar panels, because it's just not how it works. Batteries first. When it comes to solar panels, get the biggest, most powerful solar panels you can get, and plumb them into the best charge controller you can get that can handle the voltage and amperage coming in from the solar panels and convert it to the voltage and amperage needed to charge up the battery bank. So you get yourself an inverter. And the inverter size is based on what you're going to run. You don't need a 10,000 watt inverter if you're never going to run more than 2,000 or 3,000 watts at a time. I have at the cabin a 4,000 watt pure sine wave inverter charger that can peak at 12,000 watts. I can run a table saw on it. I can run a table saw and a skill saw at the same time off of that inverter. Unless you're running 240 volts, unless you're trying to run a full-size refrigerator and an electric range and a freezer and air conditioning and, then you don't need that big of a system. And honestly, if it were me, I'd probably put in multiple inverters. If I really needed that kind of power, I might put multiple inverters in. Just depends. I'd have to look at it. That would be a big system, and I'm not into those. So honestly, folks, guys like Will Pros probably are much better to watch for those great big systems. But I'm just a guy that built a cabin in the woods that has successfully lived with, and I did live out there for over a year, all alone by myself out there, running my power. But I've had it out, we've had that cabin for 15 years. Well, I started building it 15 years ago. 14 years ago, I put the power in. I've been running it all this time and made updates over the years. So from my perspective, if you're thinking that you're going to build a big house type off-grid power system, the principles are all the same. The equipment's all the same. You just need things in greater numbers. You might need 100 solar panels instead of 10. So that's something to think about. But again, real estate, big, big, big. If you can get 400 to 500 watt solar panels or bigger, and it's a reputable company, then I would do that. I would replace 3 solar panels on the ground right now with 2 that put out 1,000 watts if I had the money to go buy a couple 500 watt solar panels. Don't put 100 watt solar panels in, not unless you have a dang good reason for it. And I almost said dang it. There you go. That's a reference to one of my members. There you go, John. But, and thank you for all those that are members. I know I've given away a bunch of memberships. I want to thank all of those that are members. You know, folks, whether you're just watching the videos or you buy some cool merch. I'm not wearing my cool merch shirt today. They're all dirty. Didn't do the laundry yet. But all that kind of stuff helps the channel out, allows me to keep doing this. I do YouTube full time, so it does help. All right, so in closing, folks, I'm just going to reiterate that from a components perspective, your simple, basic, everyday, bare bones components of a solar power system are batteries, battery chargers, inverters, then solar panels and charge controllers. And I tie those together, frankly. And of course, we don't want to forget breakers and wires and combiner boxes and those kind of things. And that's it, folks. That's all there is to solar power. I hope that helps somebody out. Don't forget to drop your questions down below. And in the meantime, I'll drop another video for you to check out right here. Y'all have a great day. I really appreciate you being here. Y'all jarhead out.